Welcome, everybody. This is our 2021 Self-Direction Virtual Conference Series. My name is Molly Morris, and I'm a Senior Technical Assistance Consultant at Applied Self-Direction. And thank you for joining us for today's session, which is entitled Paid Family Caregiving, What Does It Look Like in Practice? I'm just going to run through a few very quick housekeeping issues. First, you can submit your questions and comments at any time during the session by using the chat feature in Zoom. And if you experience any audio or technical issues during today's presentation, you can send us a message again by using the chat function or emailing us at info@selfdirection.com, and we'll be more than happy to help you. So to get started with today, I'm delighted to introduce our panelists. We have Doris and Sarah Bien, who are joining us from New York. Sarah is enrolled in New York's Consumer-Directed Personal Assistance Program, and Doris, Sarah's mom, is employed as a caregiver for Sarah. Rachel Kendall lives in Missouri and supports her son, who is enrolled in a self-direction program, and she has hired her parents, her son's grandparents, to serve as paid family caregivers. And Ryan Donnelly joins us from New Hampshire, where he serves as an advocacy coordinator for Granite State Independent Living and self-directs his services. Ryan employs his father through New Hampshire's Choices for Independence program. So we're going to begin today by hearing an introduction from each of our panelists to hear their story with self-direction and paying family caregivers. And then we're going to have a discussion. I'm going to ask a series of questions, including any questions that our audience submits today. So with all that being said, I'd like to welcome Doris to share her story.
Hi. Oh, can you see me?
We can see you.
Oh, okay. I just can't see myself on here. My name is Doris Bien. This is my daughter, Sarah.
Hi.
Sarah is 38 and is very medically complex. And we live in New York, and I am her paid caregiver, as Molly had mentioned. Here in New York, I, along with Joe Morelli, worked to get legislation passed to allow parents of the disabled to be paid caregivers. So I am her paid caregiver, and it has been life-changing for us. I'm able to not work out of the home and stay home and take care of her. Right? Right, which has been absolutely life-saving for us.
Oh, yeah.
Because as Sarah ages and her medical needs become more complex, it was getting harder and harder to work outside of the home. That's our story. Right?
Right.
Yeah. So, Rachel, you want to go now, or?
Sure. So my name is Rachel Kendall, and I have a son who is currently 17. He is extremely mentally challenged and physically, and has multiple medical issues. Some I'm sure are similar to Sarah's and possibly Ryan's. We actually were on a wait list for a very long time to get to the point of having Charlie in the process of like getting into self-directed. Like the wait list, we were on it for over 7 years, and when it finally came up, they told us it was like the goose that lays the golden egg. And then they said, well, we'll need to hire some people to start working with him. And I was instantly just terrified. Too many things with medical back then. I mean, he had seizures and he had asthma attacks and had to have lots of medicine. And we never knew when we were going to have to use a fast acting. And I said, well, I'm just really nervous about this, like hiring someone and then possibly having to give them something. And our coordinator at the time, she was like, oh my gosh, you know that we can hire family members. And I said, this is amazing. Like, this is a game changer. We can do this. It was a little bit scary at first for like my parents were like, we don't want to be with our grandkid and be getting paid. And that's not why we, choose to do these type of things with him. And I said, yeah, but in the same aspect, wouldn't it be a double bonus if you could spend that time, but you were also helping provide services that he's going to receive past the age of 18, because this service still continues once he ages out of the program here in Webster County, here in Missouri. And so that's what we did. We decided to hire them. It has been extremely beneficial for us. My mom, Charlie's grandma, is by far his favorite person on the planet. And so anything that she says, like, he'll do. And so he actually has worked on more life skill things and job skill training. She was a custodian for a church here locally and had trained him on, trash and on cleaning mirrors, cleaning windows, things like that. And so we were able to work on those things aside from what he was already getting from school and from occupational and physical therapy. And so that was, like I said, it was just a game changer for us. And we just have continued with services. I think we've been on for over 5 years. We're getting close to the 6-year mark. And it has been extremely beneficial, like I said. And then my parents tag team as well. So my mom may do a few hours and my dad takes over and he'll do things like helping him with bathing and showering and brushing teeth and personal care, because he is a guy and he can say, hey, buddy, you've got to clean this way or whatever. And so that has definitely helped in that area as well. And then, like I said, they just kind of trade off on different things that they're working with him on. So that has been, it's been life changing for us to just, and for us as parents to have downtime, but have the comfort of knowing that he's taken care of by somebody that we fully trust and that already knows his situation. And I will turn it over to Ryan.
Hello, yes, thank you. Again, I am Brian Donnelly. I live in New Hampshire, uh, and my situation is that I was born with a birth defect called osteogenesis imperfecta. I'm very short in stature, only about 3 feet tall. I'm not able to walk. I use a power wheelchair to get about, and my bones break and fracture easily. So, for all of my life, I've needed assistance with my personal care. Um, as a young child, that was mostly done by my parents, and I would have a nurse that was assigned to me at school and things of that nature. Once I started transitioning to high school and started thinking about college and my adult life beyond that, that's when I got involved with Granite State Independent Living, which I also happen to work for as an advocacy coordinator. Through Granite State, I was able to get hooked up with a couple of self directed programs that are offered here in the state. And with one of them, I've been able to hire my father as as a caregiver, and it is just so wonderful to be able to compensate him for the very important work that he does, uh, because this is care that allows me to remain independent in my home. Uh, Obviously, without this care, I don't know what kind of situation I would be in. Um, so, again, very, very thankful to have that opportunity here in my state. And I guess that about wraps it up for my story. So, thank you.
Well, thank you to each of you for sharing your introductions, and I'll just invite Rachel and Doris and Sarah to join us again on the video, and I'll begin our conversation and ask some questions. Um, and I'll note before we start, Ryan, there seems like there's a little bit of a background sound on your video.
Oh, there is. I
Can you hear
apologize.
that? Oh, no
I will.
worries.
I will mute until it's time for me to speak.
Okay, sounds great. Um, so I I think it's really striking that across each of your comments, you were speaking about how hiring family has been life changing. And, I think it would probably help people to know, what, why don't you, maybe you could each share a little more about how would life change if the option to hire family wasn't part of the equation. Doris, I don't know if you want to kick us off, but would love to hear, kind of, you know, for folks who might be new to this concept, what is happening in your life now that wouldn't be able to happen if it weren't for being able to pay for family?
Well, for us, with Sarah's medical needs changing so much as she ages, it was becoming more and more difficult to hold down a job outside of the home. So if I wasn't able to be a paid caregiver for her, and this is what we discussed when I started the mission, Sarah would end up in a group home or possibly a nursing home based upon her medical needs. So life-saving for me, I'm able to keep her at home. It's just the two of us now. We lost her daddy 4 years ago. So it's just the two of us now. I'm the sole provider. So it has just been amazing to be able to do that. Okay, listen.
And I think that, you know, it's hard to imagine what you would do otherwise. I mean, based on what you're describing.
Right. Well, and one of the other things that we discussed is, you know, the traditional caregiving, and we struggled with that for many years. I mean, there continues to be a crisis. It's local, it's statewide, and it's nationwide. You know, so even if you can find somebody, they don't stay, they don't know them, so it's not reliable. You know, and if you have to get up and go to work every day, you need to know somebody's there to take care of your child.
Absolutely. And Rachel, what would you say from your experience of kind of what would change if you didn't have this option? Oh, I think you're muted. There you go.
All right, I was. I would say if we didn't have this option, I mean, just the hours and hours it takes to explain to somebody like what to look for with Charlie, how to react to him, even like there's a lot of hands-on training that goes into that. And there's only so much like on our state side of things that you can prepare somebody for until they actually walk in and then are a part of that situation as an employee. So that part of it is where it's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it definitely makes a huge difference. It's really overwhelming to people. We have extended family that has shown a little bit of interest in it. We've got teachers that, I mean, they're just overwhelmed just hearing about him when he starts in their class at school. You know, like, oh my gosh, like I'm so scared that something's going to go on and we're not going to go and know how to react. And these are special ed teachers, you know, they are trained in handling some of this stuff and they still are overwhelmed. So if they're overwhelmed, I can't imagine somebody that hasn't ever been around him or doesn't have like all the paperwork. I mean, because on the first part of training, that's what you do is you start going over that. And so that part of it, again, that's what I said earlier when I was talking, was that it was terrifying thinking of training someone that may just actually be completely overwhelmed and not know what to do. Say he did have a meltdown where it was physical, or he had a seizure, or he started having severe leg pain. I mean, all of those things kind of fall into those categories of, is that person going to be properly trained to care for my child? And especially when he was little, I mean, things were a lot worse than what they are now. I mean, he's done so well, even on the meltdowns and things like that. But when we first started, I was like, you know, to show someone, it's scary when they have to see a parent like take a child out, so to speak, lay them flat on the floor to give them deep pressure so they can calm down. And their first question, like people that don't know him are like, does that hurt him? No, it doesn't hurt him. He actually needs this. The doctors have told us he has a severe sensory issue. He has to have this kind of pressure or it doesn't work. And they're just overwhelmed by even having to provide that. So, and again, my parents are so used to it that they can just jump in and be like, okay, we know what to do in this situation. We, you know, even if they babysat once a week for his whole life, which is probably not been quite that much, because again, I have, you know, parental trust issues with a high medical needs kid. But they've seen that and they've been able to act on that and help with that. Whereas somebody that's new coming in, there would be a lot of reservations, and I would probably be present for the first several visits for respite care for him, just because they wouldn't know what kind of care that he actually needed. And again, it's one thing on paper, it's a whole different thing when you see it in person.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And then Ryan, from your perspective, you know, You know, you mentioned that being able to hire your dad is just, it's hard to imagine life without it. I don't know if there's any
Yes.
more you'd say on that.
Um, I mean, absolutely, I would agree. It's wonderful being able to hire somebody from within the family, somebody I know who can be depended on and be reliable. Because certainly I've had experiences with hiring individuals from outside the home and all that, even getting involved with uh, a couple of local nursing agencies and things like that. And certainly these are highly qualified people. They provide excellent care, but there were still times when I would have somebody come in late, or they weren't able to have somebody fill in for that day, uh, and that would leave me stuck, or having to figure out some other way to provide my care, and was stressful. But with being able to hire a family member like my dad, that's not nearly so much as a worry.
Mhm, mhm. That's wonderful. Um, you know, one thing I wanted to discuss with all of you is that I know that it's important to be paid for work when we're doing real work to receive compensation. From each of your seats and kind of the various ways you're involved in self-direction, what does it mean to compensate a family member or to be compensated as a family member to provide payment for, you know, work and support that otherwise would be provided, I think, out of the goodness of people's hearts without getting paid. Um, and maybe I'll see, I don't know, Rachel, you want to kick us off on that one, not to put you on the spot?
That's right. Can you repeat that question one more time about on the getting paid part of it?
Yeah, I'm just, I would love to hear more about what it means, you know, to be able to actually compensate your parents for the work they're doing.
Yeah. I feel like it's important. I mean, if they're working with them on a level of what, you know, an occupational therapist would be, or a teacher on like life skills and things like that, I feel like absolutely it's worth, you know, reimbursing them for their time and their effort. And again, like I said, my son would do pretty much anything for my parents. And so the fact that he works and tries extra hard because he wants to work for them and he enjoys that, absolutely, why not reimburse that? And sometimes for my parents, again, with it being a family member, a lot of family members, because they feel weird about it at first, you know, our advice was, is, you know, this gives you more opportunities to do other things with him. Like you can go to the movies, or you can go to the movies with with my son's great grandfather, and you guys can, you know, chit chat about it. He works on communication. And I said, so, you know, you can do that. And it gives you the monetary, you know, aspect of that, so you can take them out and do other things outside of the home as well. And so that part of it for them, that was kind of, you know, they were like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense, so we could reuse that in that purpose. And then it's not like we're spoiling him with like gifts or items, but we're actually giving our time. And so in that aspect of it made sense for them. And so that was kind of our drive on that. But I absolutely see no reason not to. I mean, even if, you know, everybody's been around a little kid, and, you know, you have them help, you know, pull weeds or whatever, and people say, oh, well, here's $1 for that. You know, it's a similar concept. They're still working. It's not that they're, you know, you don't want them doing extensive respite care for 6 to 8 hours and not receive anything back other than just the satisfaction of working with a family member.
Yeah, absolutely. Doris, how about you on your end?
Well, again, I think for me to be able to be compensated to provide the caregiving for Sarah, just allows her to stay in the home. Because as I said, I just can't work outside of the home at this juncture. So it allows me to be able to support her and to support us and to keep her out of the group home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. And then Ryan, and your seat, being able to pay your dad, curious, you know, actually being able to compensate him, what that means to you.
Wow.
You may not have Ryan right now, which is okay. So I'll pivot to another question, which is, on the flip side here, I mean, you've all talked about how important it is to be able to compensate a family member and what it means. For some people who self-direction is new to them, maybe they don't know a lot about home and community-based services, they're sometimes surprised or uncomfortable when they hear for the first time that there's an option for paying family caregivers. I'm curious if you've ever gotten that reaction before, and kind of how you might have or might respond to someone who is skeptical about taking that approach, maybe doesn't think that it's, I've heard people say, well, your family, so you're going to provide that care anyways. What's your response to that? And maybe, I see Rachel nodding your head. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that was my mom's first reaction. She's like, I already spend so much time with him, and I'm going to be doing some of the same stuff that I'm already doing, and I don't want to be paid. In fact, for probably the first 6 months that we had services, it was like, Mom, you have to turn in your timesheet. I just don't feel right about it. And I was like, you have to turn in your timesheet. If you have to think about the fact that he is getting services, like we are, because part of his is a respite, part of his is goal driven. And so because he gets both aspects of it, I said, you have no idea. Like, we can't just hire a babysitter and have somebody sit with him. It needs to be somebody that is trained. And I said, so you have to think of it in that aspect of it. And like I said, it kind of took that deal breaker of going, okay, this covers your mileage if you take him in the vehicle and you go take him to a transportation museum. It covers that. It covers, your entry fee, or it covers your movie or whatever that you're wanting to do with him. Whereas otherwise, I mean, when we first started, they had a son that's just 2 years older than mine. And so I said, you guys are on a budget too. This helps cover some of the extra that you'll be doing when he's with you, because sometimes there is extra. And so that kind of helped with that. But we did have to talk about that. I mean, even still, there's still times when it comes up. She's like, well, I don't want to enter my time for that specific activity. And I'm like, why? And she's like, because I just don't feel like I should be paid for that because we had such a good time. And I'm like, no, that's exactly why you should be paid for that. Yes, you love them and you're going to pour time into them, whether you're getting paid or not. It's just something added on the side. And again, sometimes it helps. Like, my mom stopped her custodian job this last year. And so the extra added income, it helps cushion that a little bit. So.
Great. I'll add to that. Ryan is taking care of his audio issue, and he'll rejoin us shortly. So I regret that we don't have Ryan here for this part of the conversation. But Doris and Sarah, how about you guys? What do you say to people who kind of aren't familiar or comfortable with the concept of paying family caregivers?
I actually just had a conversation with a mom from my group page who I just got into the program here in New York. What I say is, our kids are aging, they're adults now. And, most parents aren't able to work, and it helps to keep them at home when you can be compensated, whether it's a parent or an aunt or an uncle.
Yeah.
You have that person who is safe and knowledgeable and knows them. And if you can't find anybody, why not compensate those who are going to take care of them?
Absolutely. And then taking this from another angle, I'm sure there are some people on this call who, self-direct themselves or have a family member who self-directs and are thinking about or maybe even involved with, a paid family caregiver situation. And I'm curious what advice you would provide to people about how to successfully navigate, being the boss and employer for a family member or being employed by a family member, and kind of what you would share to people who are newly in that situation or kind of looking for best practices on the unique things that come up in that situation. Do you want to take that first, Rachel?
Sure. Just the hiring process is the first thing is to be patient. And it's like that with anything. It kind of coincides with that last question that you did have. You know, you're going to be paying them. So as being the boss, you have to think objectively, but you also have to tell that to your employees as well. So for example, sometimes that's difficult. It's easier for parents to come up with objectives than it is for a grandparent that adores their grandchild, or for an uncle or an aunt. We've got friends that they have some sort of service and they have an aunt that takes care of their niece. Um, in that aspect of it, you have to think objectively. So that's still an ongoing, thing that we've talked to my parents about, like, oh, he did so well. And I'm like, but he will do so much for you. Like, you have to, put that in there. You have to include that, yes, you told him that he needed to help with dishes, but it took him, 4 prompts for him to help. And so a lot of patience, a lot of objectivity needs to go into that. And so that's something as an employer and as an employee, where you step in as a boss, you have to do that. So anybody that would be hired, if you were in a medical field or even as a teacher, you would have to report the things that you've done with that child or with that adult too. I mean, to make sure that those things are in place. And so, and obviously you guys know all of this is government backed. And so if they want you to dot every I, cross every T, it has to be put in per their specs. And so that is, I mean, it's their job. So again, they're not just having fun, but they also have to look at the aspect of, we have to report this back in a specific way. And then we have to, go through, approve it a certain way. So a lot of patience there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Doris and Sarah, what about on your end?
Wow, Rachel, that was a really good analogy.
Yeah,
Did a really good job. I mean, I looked at it from the perspective of, like, maybe her uncle, because her uncle would do respite for her on occasions. Just keeping the communication open and making them really understand that, yes, it's your niece. Yes, you can go and have fun, but it's still a job and things have to be done.
Yep.
Right?
Right.
All the caregiving aspects of it, but just really keeping the communication open and making them understand that it is in fact a job.
Now, I think I saw that maybe Brian is back in the room.
Yes, I am.
Oh,
Yes.
Brian, I'm so glad to see you.
I'm so sorry about earlier. Oh,
Oh,
gosh.
not to worry. That's how the internet works. It
It
just
sure is. Oh, boy.
So, Ryan, we were just talking about, for people who are joining us who may be thinking about hiring a family member if they self-direct, or being hired as a family member, what's your advice to successfully navigate that unique situation of being family, but also having a working relationship together?
I absolutely agree that communication is key. It's absolutely key. Communicate well, set boundaries, and in the beginning, just be really clear on how you want your care to be provided, the way in which you do things, maybe the kinds of things you like to eat as far as meal prep things go, and all that, things like that. Be don't you, even though it's a family member, you can't necessarily assume that somebody just instantly knows, the the way you like things, especially if they're new to caregiving. Not necessarily a parent, maybe an uncle or a nephew or something like that. So again, yeah, communication is key.
Mhm, mhm. No, that's great advice. And Ryan, I think I'll circle back to some of the questions we missed you for, just really
Sure,
quick.
please.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, I, I'm I'd love to hear from your perspective what it means to be able to compensate your dad, as opposed to just having him support you out of the goodness of his heart, and kind of what that means in your family and in your life.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful because, uh, as I said earlier, it is important work, and I think it's deserving of compensation, and uh, yeah, absolutely.
And then
And
we were also talking about how some people who aren't familiar with this concept of being in a self-direction program and getting paid by family, they might kind of balk at it at first. And I don't know if you've ever heard that kind of response before, of people not being comfortable or unfamiliar kind of how you respond to that, or how you would kind of to explain why it is something that's worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard of that response. I certainly haven't had it myself, only because, I come from a situation where I've always needed personal care in my life, and to me, if the person that can provide that care is a family member, somebody I know and trust and can rely upon, then that's really the best situation right there. I'll always take somebody that I know personally and have a good rapport with over having to hire somebody from the community and all that. So uh, yeah, I don't think there's really any need to be squeamish or uncertain about that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rachel, I see you have someone who's joined you. Hello.
Yeah, Charlie, you want to say hi? Hi.
Hi, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
This is my son. He's trying to squish me off the seat now.
We're glad you're here. Um, I'll ask another question here. So, the pandemic has been an interesting time for all of us, to say the least. And many states have made some changes to their programs during this time to make services more flexible, easier to manage. So, many states in the past have already allowed people to hire various types of family members for many years, while others haven't allowed for this option. Some states have done it for the first time during the pandemic, and it may actually be, some of the folks who are with us today might be working in a state where they're thinking about whether or not to make this option permanent, or maybe even do it for the first time after watching other states allow for people to hire family. Um, I'd love to hear from each of you what you would say to these state leaders that are thinking about making this option permanent, and kind of, and maybe similar things of what you've said in your own advocacy in your states that's been helpful in helping to make these choices available. And Rachel, you're biggest on my screen right now, so I'll pass it to you first.
Well, we actually, I mean, ours has always been available. So I would just urge other states to, please consider it, not just for the services that are provided, but for the people that are receiving the services, how much more beneficial. Kind of like what Ryan said, I would always choose a family member over someone else. I mean, somebody that he already knows, somebody they're comfortable with. To me, it's an obvious choice if that family member is willing to do so. And so, in light of that, I would just say, absolutely consider it. I mean, my dad, during the pandemic stuff, we were allowed actually extra hours during that time frame if our caregivers wanted to come in and help. And so Charlie and my dad would read. My dad ordered him the same conservation magazine, and so Charlie would read a full paragraph, and he was working on comprehension. And so they would video chat about it. They would read the article together, and then my dad would ask him questions for comprehension. And so that kind of stuff worked out really well during the pandemic. And my dad's like, ooh, that would have been so difficult for somebody that wasn't used to Charlie to understand on what we were trying to do. And I said, yeah, that's why it's a bonus to that. And so, I would just really urge, other states to really consider it. And like I said, we've always had that option. So I don't know, we've never had to advocate to keep that option. We've had to advocate to keep funding and things like that in the state of Missouri, but we've never had to advocate to keep our family members as food service givers. So that part of it would make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, what about in your seat in New Hampshire there?
Yeah, well, I would add to that and say, um, you know, again, allowing the hiring of family members as paid caregivers it's a win for everybody, really. And I know there are a lot of cases where folks are being cared for by family members, but if that care isn't compensated, they may not have that individual to rely on, because people have to be able to put food on the table and all that. An aunt or an uncle who's helping out as a paid caregiver right now, if that compensation went away, it's very likely they'd have to get a job doing something else just to make ends meet. So I think it's really important that we make is upheld and that it can be right now here in our state of New Hampshire. Uh, Again, I mentioned that we have a couple of different programs to provide personal care. One of them allows family members, the other doesn't. Um, and it would be really great to uh, have some more parity between those programs to give more people options, because there are some folks who are eligible for one program and not the other, and it's very challenging right now for folks to find the care that they need to remain independent in their homes.
Mhm, mhm. No, and it's interesting. I believe Doris and Sarah, you also have a situation where you've had the experience of having a program where you can hire family and you can't. I'm curious what that's like on your end too. And also, you know, what you would say to folks who are thinking about doing this for the first time in their state.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I thought we were talking about the pandemic. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was just weaving it in too, since Ryan has had the experience of having a program where you can hire family and where you can't. Just to mention, I think you've had that same experience, if I'm not mistaken, but I might be.
Yeah, no, well, there's two programs here in New York, and the CDPAP program, which is where I get paid for, and then another program, which is just self-direction, that I can't get paid for, but I can hire family members. And as I said, her uncle used to do respite for her.
Yes. Absolutely. And then your thoughts on, post-pandemic states that are making these decisions about whether or not to expand or continue to allow paid family, kind of what would you say in those instances?
Well, the pandemic certainly has brought the crisis of caregiving into light for many, including our lawmakers. With the nursing homes and the group homes being those the hardest hit, self-direction had helped keep our loved ones safer. Yeah. And self-direction saves the state's money. So, and I wonder if anyone has ever done a survey as to how many states safe within self-direction compared to those in the nursing home and group homes, because those were the ones that were hardest hit. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it saves money, and I was able to keep Sarah safe at home. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll say too, that's, we've heard a lot anecdotally across the country that in self-direction programs and home and community-based programs in general, the COVID rates were much lower. Some of that data is not as well organized or consistent across the country as the data is on nursing homes. So,
Right.
But I think it's really
Right. And not to mention the families that weren't able to visit their children and, and in the nursing homes and that kind of stuff. I would have been horrified. Yeah, anyway.
And while we're talking to you guys, Doris and Sarah, I'd love to hear if you would be willing to share a little more about, I know you guys were instrumental in getting change in legislation in New York that's allowed for paid family caregiving. For folks who might be interested in doing some similar advocacy work in their own state, if you could share a little bit about kind of what the process was like, what you learned from it, what worked, what didn't work, things like that.
Well, we learned that the process was very long and very complicated.
Yeah.
My biggest way of advocating, so Joe Morelli, who is now a congressman, he was the assemblyman when we started the mission. He simply was out campaigning and he stopped on our door. I'm like, come in, have a cup of coffee. We were struggling so much with finding care. Sit down, have a cup of coffee. Let me tell you about my daughter. Let me tell you my story. These are the struggles we have. What do you think? And he, amazingly was so for it. And, it took us 5 years and a lot of, well, why should we pay a parent their child anyway? That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But we finally got it done. And I mean, to this day, as I said, it's a struggle just to keep the program going. But just sharing your story, we're one of millions, but just sharing your story. Everybody has their unique story.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. I'm gonna pivot into answering some of the questions that we're getting submitted online through our attendees. So I just want to remind folks that are listening that you can submit your questions anytime. And we'd love to share as many as we can. So I'll share the first one here. Are paid family caregivers getting respite from care or backup when you're sick or unavailable? Are those sources the same sources that you were avoiding by being the paid caregiver? Does anyone on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes, it is.
During the pandemic, no, we did not have backup
No.
at all. But as I said, my brother through another program in New York does respite. So he's our backup.
Yeah.
Okay. Ryan, what about you? Is there a backup situation for your dad?
Yeah, I do not have any sort of backup, at least nothing that would be provided to me by the state in an emergency. And as far as respite care goes, I don't believe that is something that is offered with the programs I have. I know for folks in the developmental disability community, they have more access to stuff like that, but for self-directed care that I receive, no, not that I'm aware of.
Mhm. And then how about you, Rachel?
Well, I mean, obviously, with my parents living in the same household still, that makes a big difference. So if one of them's down, more than likely the other one's probably close to being down or is down or will potentially expose Charlie, which he, along with his medical needs, he doesn't have an immune system. We have to get treatments every 3 weeks. We did have a college student. He's rolled off now as one of our employees, but we did have a college student as backup, somebody that was outside of that specific household in case we needed backup. During the pandemic, we didn't have anything, that they had said that they would help provide. I mean, they're always willing to help provide another employee if you want to go, put them through the training and that kind of stuff. There's always that option. But we have actually recently talked about doing an extra outside of the home, not our home, but my parents' home, so that we can have backup just in case something like that happens. Ironically enough, my mom was gone through 3.5 months of the main part of the pandemic. My sister had a baby in Oklahoma, and she was actually gone. So that was when my dad kind of stepped in and helped out on his end. And my mom didn't do like any video appointments, respite care, or anything like that during that time. So my dad really kind of stepped up, and that's actually why we hired my dad in the first place. Was he was our backup in case mom wasn't available to go because she had appointments or whatever, and my dad could step in and do so. And then we just started utilizing him more in the last year and a half, really. So, but yeah, that is something that would be nice to have. Again, it would still be one of those things that you'd want to vet the system pretty well to make sure it was somebody, or it was a situation where it was like an absolute must that you had to have respite care off to the side of what your normal team is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The next one is more of a comment, but it's about New York. So Doris and Sarah, I'll let you guys respond and see if you have any further comments on this. So the comment is, in New York State, while it is possible for parents of adults to be paid caregivers through the consumer directed program, the DD system still will not allow parents to be paid caregivers, no doubt because of misguided fears about fraud. Sometimes there are not family members other than parents who are available to provide care.
I'm sorry, can you say that last part? You were the video or the sound was breaking up.
Yeah.
This person was saying sometimes there are not family members other than the parents who are available to provide care. saying that only parents are available, but in some in the DD system saying in New York that they won't allow parents to be paid.
Yeah, so that's been an ongoing problem, that you've got to do your research and contact people. I run a group page where I help a lot of parents do that. A lot of counties within Monroe County, or a lot of counties in New York State, still are of the belief that you can't do it. I just helped a mom navigate through that, and she literally just started working last week.
Okay, gotcha. Seeing the next question here, the question is, isn't there some incentive to bill for the hours authorized so that the state sees that the individual is using the hours? Rachel, I think this might have come in when you were talking about your parents being hesitant to bill. I don't know if you have any comments on that, but it sounds like you've gotten them some more support to begin seeing the benefits of billing.
Right. Well, and that on that side of it, it's the documentation side of it that really comes into play on the child or the adult receiving services. Because for us, like in the state of Missouri, we set up a care plan, and the care plan includes specific goals. So for example, like goals would be him making eye contact and actually responding to people's verbal prompts. So if he goes into a restaurant with my parents and he doesn't look up and tell the waitress hi, mom would be like, hey, you need to make sure to tell them hi. And if he doesn't do it, so within so many prompts. And so that some of that's changed since we first started. Before, it was kind of in like story form, and then they would just read through it and say, yes, this child still qualifies for services. And that actually is where it kind of goes in under the billed hours. And so it goes back into the documentation or the reporting side of it. It's a lot like the medical realm in that aspect of it. I'm medical, and my husband is too. And anytime that you're with a patient or you receive a call and you have to go out and you attend to that person, you have to document what you've done to justify your services to be a paid employee. And it's the same thing with a caregiver or with a family caregiver. And so that would just fall underneath that. And like I said, we've actually, I think our documentation forms have changed approximately 6 times since my parents have started, and 3 of those have been in the last year and a half. And so that's a lot of adjustment for somebody that's taking in new information going, okay, so I do have to include this or I don't. And so I'm like, for us to justify services, it has to be listed a certain way. So, and that's kind of what that comes back to. And the incentive, is kind of like what we talked about before. You can't ever you're never going to fully convince somebody that really truly loves a family member that they need to be paid for those services. So that it kind of is a give and take type of situation. For Diane, that makes for or for Doris, that makes for a perfect situation for her, because she can actually say, I can't work outside of the home and I need to be able to take care of my daughter. So far, because Charlie's still underage, I'm not eligible to do that in the state of Missouri. Like, my husband and I can't be paid caregivers. My daughter can't. She can once she's 18 and she's out of the house. She can be a paid caregiver. But for us as parents, we may never have the opportunity as long as he lives underneath our house. And so to make sure that that's open for other family members is, still key.
Wow.
So I'm looking at the next question we got, and this is a harder question, and I'll say for myself, as someone who is a sibling of someone with a disability, this is a question I ask myself a lot, and the answers are hard. But since all the family caregivers employed are older than the care recipient, what is the plan when they are aging or pass away and cannot provide care? Transitions are so much harder when everything changes. Wonder if anyone feels comfortable talking about that topic, which I know is the hard one.
I'll jump in there. With Charlie, because of some of his medical needs, we never know. When he could get a severe infection, and he could get, really bad, really fast. And so that's always something that we have, in the back of our mind of what are we going to do? What are the steps that we're going to do? This next year is pivotal for us because we'll roll over from a juvenile type of care with Medicaid to an adult care. And so they always want some sort of plan in place of who's going to be over that child. Ours will be, he will have huge changes if that happens. And either if he passes away, everything is completely covered. For us, if we pass away, we have it where he's going to my brother and my sister-in-law. They still have a lot of younger kids. They're younger than we are. And so that's in the plan. The only thing is that it's in a completely different state. So they may be able to have care over him if he's living in a group home, that kind of stuff, but they would be the ones that would have to step in and do that. And they would be the ones almost instantly over that. There would definitely be some legalities that would have to take place, just as there would be with anything else. When somebody has legal guardianship over someone, and that person should have that need of further care. And so that part of it, I mean, it can get really tricky really fast. There's not really anything in place with self-directed here in Missouri should that happen, other than whoever you have lined up to take care of that person.
Gotcha.
Yes, I agree with Rachel.
Yeah.
It's yeah, you just kind of gotta play. I mean, my brother and his wife will take over for Sarah, but my brother's 2 years older than I. So then you depend on the nieces and the nephews, the younger ones, you know, within that same family. So, but
Yeah.
it is definitely a tough question.
And just pray that they're willing to do so.
Exactly.
It is tough. It is tough. In my situation, uh, I have two younger sisters, but they have families of their own. I don't know what their situation is going to look like if anything happened to my dad or anything, who I live with at the moment. So yeah, it's a hard question. It's a hard question.
It's a very difficult question.
Yes, it is, right?
Another question we got. Sometimes there are a lot of concerns from managed care organizations about workers being appropriately trained, that a family member needs to have some of the same group home training that agency providers have to keep folks healthy and safe. What do you say about that notion?
Yeah, okay.
I think that the parents are the best person to do the training. That know the child the best. I know we ran into a situation through self-direction that they wouldn't hire the person that mom wanted hired because they needed to be able to drive their 20-passenger van. And she's like, why would I need training on driving a 20-person van when I'm working for one individual? That's the protocol. Well, where does self-direction mean then? So
I agree. I agree. Given that we're talking about self-directed programs, I think the only training that is really required is whatever the consumer deems appropriate. You know, I know I know my needs. I know the care that I need throughout the day, and I'm I'm competent. I'm able to direct the people that care for me in how to do that. So yeah, I don't think the training involved needs to be anything more strenuous than what the what the person requires.
Right. As long as you're not, I mean, I would say, like, for example, for like our extended family that doesn't know like Charlie's medical needs as well as like my parents do, I would say that falls into that category. The college student that we had working with us, he was pretty familiar with him. I didn't ever have him, like, he was not over like any medications or anything like that. Most of the fast acting stuff has kind of fallen by the wayside. When I was talking about earlier years and things that were, absolutely needed, he doesn't need as much of now. And so, our state requires a few trainings, even if they are not, even if they're family members, it's still required training. So abuse and neglect, some of them, if they're going to be passing meds, that kind of stuff, they require some med training. We were able to exempt from some of that because they had evidence of Charlie staying with my parents prior to that. And as an employer of Charlie and I, we were able to say no. They're fully qualified in that, and so we can exempt them from a few of those. But there are still some mandatory reporting was one. They still have to take a certification for that. They still have to do the abuse. Excuse me, I'm trying to sneeze. Still have to do the abuse and neglect. And then there's one other one. I think it's actually just like a it's just a class on certification. Charlie has been through it's different across the board. There's places called Judifying, there's Easter Seals, there's parent training through different hospital systems. And so when we went through Judifying when Charlie was really little, we went through parent training classes. And after we were done, we asked if our parents could attend those classes. It's worth like 8 college credit hours. And so, yeah, it was actually pretty impressive. And so it's free. And so we were like, would you be interested? And I think we ended up taking 11 to 15 people through those classes. And so because we had records of my parents going through those, I mean, they automatically could say, well, they know this child, they know proper techniques if there's a meltdown or if there is a specific medical need or whatever in place. And so that helped in that aspect too, because we could say, as employers that yes, they're fully qualified. But again, why would you have a self-directed program that the person that's hiring should be able to say yes, they are completely capable of this program? And there's still restrictions in place. So again, it's government backed, so there's going to be protocol in place that they are very aware of, like the possibility of fraud, and they're very aware of people taking advantage of the system. So they're going to have other things in place to double check on that, and documentation is one of them.
One of the other questions we got is asking, did the extra funds paid to family help alleviate any financial stress for them? Is that the case for anyone?
Well, I well,
Ryan, were you gonna say something?
I would say so. I mean, I would say so, but
Yeah.
but I'd say that's not the primary motivation for doing it. At least not in my dad's case, and not in my case of having him work for me. I just think it deserves to be compensated because it is important work. And again, if I'm going to have somebody working for me to do that care, I'd rather it be somebody I know. But I mean, yeah, sure, the extra money doesn't hurt for him, I'm sure.
Another question we got related to pay is, are the caregivers paid hourly or through a stipend or lump sum amount? And if paid hourly, did the consumer, the person self-directing, have any say in how much the caregiver is paid? And I know that can really vary across programs, so maybe you could each speak to that.
I'll jump in there. We have a lump sum budget, and then they're paid hourly. We actually get to set their hourly rate. We always start at a lower rate, and then within so many months or whatever, if things are working out, we'll bump that up. But yeah, we can actually set the hourly rate. We do have to submit it and it be approved. But we actually have leeway. I think it is about $6 difference. So from the starting rate pay, and it's obviously minimum wage or higher, and then we're allowed to cap out at a certain amount. And again, it's budgeted. We get a certain amount every year, and so many hours per week are approved. And so, and every person's different on their needs. Like Charlie may be approved for 40 hours when we get to, his adult status. And if he's living in an environment that's more on his own or in a group home, then he'll qualify for more services versus if he lives at home and if he's with mom and dad, or he's with a work program, etc. And so that's a big, key, element of that, of what is allowed and what's not. And yes, it's very different across the board. Different states, the amount, how they're paid, all of that is different.
Yeah, I was going to say in my state, it is an hourly rate, and the amount that my caregivers are paid is dependent on the tasks that they perform for that week. So I actually have a case manager that I work with to help determine my care plan and kind of the maximum amount of hours that I'm allowed per week. So, like, say, such and such time allotted for preparing meals, such and such amount of time for doing laundry throughout the week, etc. And then every day we will use an electronic verification system to kind of go through and say, all right, this task was performed today, this task was performed today, etc., etc. And that's how that's verified.
Yes, our system in New York is very much the same as
Yes.
yours, Ryan. It's an hourly rate. Sarah's allotted X amount of hours based upon oops, I thought we were muted. Based upon the task that is in her plan.
Yeah.
So it's an hourly rate.
Mm-hmm.
And Molly, if I could make a correction, one of the questions was in New York State that it's possible for parents to be paid through the CDPAP, but not through OPWDD.
Mhm.
They are not allowed to be paid through OPWDD. That's a federal program, and they do not have that in place. So I misspoke.
Okay, got it. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I just want to give the biggest thanks to Sarah and Doris and Rachel and Ryan. It's been incredibly helpful to just hear each of your experiences and perspectives. We're getting comments coming in, people saying this has been extremely helpful. So thank you to each of you for being here today, and to everyone who's joined us. Thank you for listening in. We still have a couple more sessions in our conference series, so I hope you'll be joining us. And thank you, everybody. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. This has been important.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care, you guys.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, you guys.